Once again, thank you so much for being here and for joining us. When I looked at the registration list, I saw many names that I knew and many names that I did not know. So if you are new to participating in the Michigan Dental Association Committee, welcome. We're really glad to have you. And if you're a continuing member, thank you so much for being a dedicated MDA volunteer. We really appreciate it. It's interesting, this is our first year doing the committee orientation via webinar. We early on in my tenure here at the Michigan Dental Association, kind of did an evaluation of our committees and sought feedback from a lot of our committee members, committee chairs, about what they knew about organized dentistry. And one of the things that came out of the survey was that it would be really helpful if committee members had a better context about what their committee does and how their committee fits into organized dentistry overall. So as part of that process, we did develop a standard committee orientation, and the first year that we implemented it, I actually went to all the different committees and conducted it along with your committee director with the approval of, and of course, the scheduling of the committee chair. Then in the second year, we asked the committee directors to do it at the first committee meeting of each year. So that is what happened last year. This year, I heard from the executive staff that they would really thought it would be helpful if we moved it out of the committee meeting itself and just did the orientation on the topics that every committee had in common in one fell swoop. So that's what we're trying this year. You will get specific information about your committee, the one that you are serving on, at your first meeting. So this is going to primarily answer all those basic questions that every committee member has in common. So I'm going to share my screen. You'll see me on the screen just as a little bitty picture, and you will be walking through a PowerPoint presentation that will kind of give you the basics of what you need to know. So we're going to talk about the committee orientation. We're going to start with organization of the Michigan Dental Association. We're going to talk a little bit about the MDA structure. You might recall that a few years ago in 2014, the House of Delegates approved some changes as to how the MDA was going to be governed. As a result of those changes, our House of Delegates, which has 102 members, is broken up into 12 different regions, and of course is comprised of 26 component dental societies, has new responsibilities. They can do advisory resolutions, but they're also responsible for bylaws, for election of the board, and ADA delegation. The committees of the House of Delegates include the nominating committee, and there's one representative from each region on that nominating committee. They also have a bylaws language review committee, of course the reference committee, and the committee on credentials, rules, and orders. Those are House committees. Our Board of Trustees is made up of 6 officers, including the president-elect, the immediate past president, our secretary, treasurer, editor, and of course, Speaker of the House. As you all know, we have 9 trustees and they all serve at large. I am a member of the Board of Trustees as the executive director, an ex officio member without the ability to vote. The board has 16 standing committees and 5 board committees, and they're responsible for setting the policy, budget, and dues. They also employ me as the CEO executive director. So let's take a little bit of a look at what my responsibilities are. I'm a non-voting member of the board and the executive committee. I also serve as the secretary of the Insurance and Financial Group, which is the MDA's for-profit subsidiary, and I serve as a consultant to the foundation and to the PAC. I'm also an ex officio member of all committees, and I really do try to get to every committee at least once every year and sometimes more. I'm responsible for managing your staff and supervise the development of annual budget and ensure appropriate risk management for the organization. I also represent the MDA in all our business dealings. I serve as a liaison in terms of advocacy, and I definitely promote positive PR. So you can see from the PowerPoint, there are a number of administrative responsibilities that I have as well, including helping the board do a good job by providing them with useful and appropriate information. I also want to make sure that our Board of Trustees meets the needs of our members, and I oversee the strategic planning process and reports on the progress of our strategic plan at every meeting of the Board of Trustees. So let's talk a little bit about that strategic planning process. We have 4 overarching goals in our strategic plan, and the plan is a 4-year plan because it's very difficult to get anything substantial done in just 1 year. Now, the plan is a focused plan. It does not include every activity that the MDA undertakes, and it certainly is not an indicator of what is most important to the Michigan Dental Association. There are many core responsibilities that are overseen and conducted by committees that don't show up on the strategic plan at all, but they're very critical for the functioning, and they're definitely the expectations of our members. So I just wanted to set it up a little bit like that so that you could see that the strategic plan is more about where are we going than a description of where we are today. Our first membership goal is indeed a membership goal, and it's one that I think you guys can all relate to. It's to deliver exceptional member value. We judge this according to a survey that we conduct every couple of years. Our scores are very good already, so we're really hoping to see an increase in the number of people who give us the very top scores, exceptional member value. And you can see we have 3 strategies that we use, and I'm sure this will relate to many of you. You can see how your committee fits into meeting current and emerging dentist and dental team needs for CE and training, helping members succeed by providing practice management resources. And one of the most important, and I think one that people rely upon us for, is to favorably position the profession and the MDA members with legislators and the public. You can see that a lot of what the MDA does and a lot of our new initiatives fall under this delivering exceptional member value objective. Another membership goal is to increase member participation. So the objectives, there are 2 objectives under that. One is to achieve a superlative member retention rate, because the more we keep, the fewer we have to go out and recruit or try to get back. And the third objective, is to increase the number of full dues paying members by 5%. That is actually a pretty tough goal. It would be about 125 dentists paying full dues. And you can imagine, with the number of dentists who are retiring as the baby boomers age, and then we have a lot of people at the front end of their dental career who are paying less than full dues, makes it challenging to see an increase in the number of full dues paying members. But we have a number of strategies that we're using, and obviously focusing on our largest component societies is one of those critical aspects. Our finance goal is one of assuring organizational sustainability. If you don't have enough resources, you're not going to be able to serve your members, you're not going to be able to keep your membership numbers up. So we want to make sure that we're here and we have what we need to sustain our organization. And this is all about the money. Our annual budget, every year we're very fiscally responsible. We want to make sure that we develop a budget that's in the black. Generally speaking, we're going to see small dues increases every now and then, be focusing on non-dues revenue, making sure our investment returns are good, and also maintaining good reserves. Our reserves, just to let you know, at this point in time, are around 90% at the end of the year last year. So we're well exceeding these 75% benchmark. Then our organizational goal is to make sure that our capacity as a state association will be sufficient to meet the needs of our membership. We want to make sure that our components are strong. Right now we're focusing on our shared member database, and we're also giving a lot of focus on leadership development. We'd like to see even more new members participate as volunteer leaders in the future. So that's a quick overview of our strategic plan. We do talk about it, as I said, at every board meeting. So if you have the opportunity to sit in on a board meeting or say, participate as an observer, you'll see us talk about this every time. Excuse me. Now there's some legal issues, and I don't mean legal issues like, oh no, bad news, but legal issues, things that you should be aware of as a committee member. So let's talk about those now. One of the things that are important for you to know that as a volunteer, you are a fiduciary to the Michigan Dental Association. So what does that really mean? Fiducia means trust. And it talks about the fact that as a volunteer leader, you are in a position where you are acting for another under circumstances which require trust, good faith, honesty, all characteristics which I'm sure you have in abundance. So fiduciary is someone who stands in a special relation of trust, confidence, or responsibility to a member. As a committee member, you have fiduciary responsibilities to the Michigan Dental Association. So let's talk about that. It's duty of care, duty of loyalty, duty of obedience. And I know that this was all in your pre-information, but just as a reminder, the duty of care basically means you have a duty to show up, to engage in the meeting, to participate actively, to act in the best interests of the MDA. So maybe not yourself personally, or not your specialty society, or not your component, but the best interests of the members of the Michigan Dental Association overall. You also have a responsibility to act in a fiscally responsible manner. If you do those things, then you're completely fulfilling your duty of care. So I have, if we were meeting in person, this would give us an opportunity to talk a little bit about what the duty of care means. A couple of questions for further thinking. And the first question is, how does the board treat information provided by committees? If you're living up to your duty of care, which every committee does, the board treats your information, your reports to them very seriously. They don't turn around and redo committee work, although occasionally they may not agree with the recommendation that you bring forward. They may make some changes to it, or even send it back to you and ask for more thinking, or to consider additional facts and come back with another recommendation. So you can see that the board is also living up to its duty of care. Regarding a fiscally responsible manner, the question is, gosh, what if I'm not that good with numbers? I'm not really a finance person. Do I belong on a committee? And the answer is, all you have to do is use the usual care that an ordinary person would use. You're not expected to necessarily have an MBA in finance in order to be a volunteer at the Michigan Dental Association. So for many people, that's probably a relief. Let's talk a little bit about duty of loyalty. A lot of that has to do with conflict of interest. You want to avoid a conflict of interest, to identify or disclose actual or potential conflicts of interest. You also have a duty to maintain confidentiality about confidential or proprietary information from the Michigan Dental Association. So you have a really thorough form that gives you a lot of information and examples about a conflict of interest. And as we look at the questions for further thinking, one of the reasons why some volunteers may not recognize possible conflicts of interest is because they're so aligned within themselves that they don't necessarily see it. It's like, oh, or I can compartmentalize it in my head and make sure it doesn't influence me. The easiest thing to do is, if you have any doubts or any concerns, or if it even crosses your mind, it's always better to disclose, because there is no conflict of interest that bars you from service at the Michigan Dental Association. So it's always better to err on the side of disclosure. We also talked a little bit about duty of confidentiality, what can be revealed about discussions in executive session. And that's an interesting thing because we have had some questions about that recently related to executive session. And the fact of the matter is that a committee can decide for itself what information is appropriate to reveal, as long as the committee is in agreement. And so they may also designate someone to speak for them. But when it comes to executive session, the idea behind having a closed session in a committee is simply to allow committee members to speak honestly and openly on a sensitive subject, for example. So more information can be made available to you on that if you have a concern. Then let's talk about duty of obedience. That's basically the duty to act in accordance with our government documents. So in other words, you should abide by our bylaws, our mission, vision, and core values, and then the actions that are taken by your committee should be supported by your committee as a whole. So for example, the discussion question says, when is it appropriate for a member to suggest reconsideration of a committee decision? Generally speaking, it's not appropriate to suggest reconsideration of a committee decision just because you don't like the way the vote turned out. On the other hand, if there is information that is new or a perspective that has not been offered, certainly that would be an appropriate time to request reconsideration of a committee decision. So let's talk a little bit about some other legal type issues that may come up. Attorney-client privilege, frankly, that's one that does not come up much in a committee setting, unless it's a board committee like the executive committee. But an attorney-client session is one where the group is seeking advice from the MDA's attorney. In that case, it's protected. The disclosure cannot be compelled, but it must remain confidential within the control group only. So what is a control group? It's people who absolutely have to need to know. In other words, if you have the room peppered with a bunch of staff or members that are simply observing, that would be enough to say that it was not truly attorney-client privileged. So within the discussion question is, with whom can you discuss a topic that was addressed in an attorney-client session? Really only the people who were in that attorney-client session should be made privy to the discussion itself. So another thing, the antitrust is a topic that is definitely one that is something that is of interest to committees. Antitrust, is something that we guard against. The federal government and independent organizations see that the MDA is an organization of competitors. In other words, you with your colleagues on the committee probably compete with each other. And as a result, you have to be concerned about antitrust. And that happens when two or more independent dentists engage in a joint activity. And that joint activity must restrain competition. In other words, if it's shown to have that impact, it is illegal per se, or if there is the belief on the part of a reasonable person that that would be anti-competitive, then it is considered as restraining competition. Now, the interesting thing about antitrust is that there are a lot of different folks who can bring an allegation of antitrust against an organization or against individuals. It can be enforced by the Justice Department, the Federal Trade Commission, or suits can be brought by private parties. And so the question that I've asked in discussions previously is, can two dentists in the same practice be guilty of antitrust? Because it says two or more independent dentists or entities must engage in joint activity. So if you practice with someone, can you be guilty of antitrust? And the answer, of course, is yes, depending upon the structure of your practice. So let's move on and talk a little bit more about conflict of interest. As we mentioned, we have a policy and there is a form that you will need to sign. Many of you have probably already done so. And the key issues to consider is, that your volunteer or family, you as a volunteer or your family may have a personal or professional conflict with the fiduciary duty to MDA. You might have the opportunity to use information gained for personal gain or advantage or to the detriment of the Michigan Dental Association, or perhaps use the authority of your position for personal gain or advantage. In addition, there's also the opportunity to use or disclose any non-public, confidential, or proprietary information of the MDA. This is all explained on the form that you've received. So for you, you would think, what do I need to disclose? The question is it a conflict that is known to you, or maybe something that you think people might perceive? You might think about, what are my personal or professional interests? And what is meant by personal gain or advantage? Is that only money? Probably not. It could be a position, prestige, or power. And what is detrimental to the MDA? If in doubt, disclose. Using or disclosing information, that information that you receive is considered the property of the MDA, so you want to keep it confidential. So those are key questions. And if you have questions when you're filling out your form, you can talk to your committee director or seek advice from me or from Michelle Cruz. So let's talk a little bit about good governance. I see we're not quite to the halfway mark, so I feel pretty confident that we're going to be done in a timely manner. Good governance, here are the core values of the Michigan Dental Association. We're committed to ethical standards. We embrace proactivity, not reactivity. We have a culture that's committed to openness and a commitment to transparency. We also believe that members are our owners. They are the reason that we are here. The trustees are fiduciary to the MDA. We recognize diversity and viewpoints, and we want to make sure that our results that we get from the activities we undertake align with all our policies and also with the strategic plan. Now, going back to diversity a little bit, recognizing the diversity in viewpoints, we recognize too that it can be very difficult to eradicate bias. We have all been brought up, we all have a lot of baggage, we all have had our own experience. So it's very important to keep an open mind and bring as many diverse perspectives to the table as possible, either through membership in the committees, through research that we conduct, through think tanks and things like that. A diversity of perspectives will really allow our organization to do the best possible job for our members. And that's really what it's all about. Now, as you sit on a committee, there are always many decisions that you will need to make when you're thinking about what's the right thing to do or what recommendation do we want to make to the board. And of course, some committees have activities that are delegated to them. Others bring forward issues and recommendations for board discussion. But either way, it's important that committee members and the committees as a whole make good decisions. And there are a number of things that stand in the way of making those good decisions. And some of the barriers to good decisions is just conventional wisdom, which is everybody knows, but you haven't really examined it. Confirmation bias is where the facts that you see line up with what you already believed, so you tend to confirm those facts while disregarding others. Groupthink is another thing where you're having such a great time as a committee and you're all really clicking along really well, so you have a tendency to put agreeing with each other over and above bringing up difficult subjects. Time pressure is a big barrier to good decision making, because if you've only got so long and you maybe don't have all the facts that you would like to have, you're under pressure to deciding anyway. Micromanagement is another common one, where you want to control every little part of it, or you feel that you must. And then finally, politics, cliques, friendships, things like that can have a way of, you always vote with so-and-so, so you're going to vote with him again. Or you usually agree with what's her name, therefore you'll go along with what she suggests. So I don't think personally that we have huge problems with any of these at the Michigan Dental Association or in any of our committees, but it's good to be aware of what the barriers can be and to recognize them when you see them so that you can work around it, because that's just human nature. Now let's talk a little bit, moving on, about the committee operating manual. You're aware, I'm sure, that there's an operating manual that is used for all the committees that basically lays out how committees are supposed to function. And I'm just going to pull out some highlights from that. One is when it comes to how we are governed here at the Michigan Dental Association, we have a hierarchy of rules that we go by. And of course, the most important rule is the rule of law. If something is prescribed by law, then absolutely it will be done at the Michigan Dental Association. The next level down is our bylaws. We must function in accordance with our bylaws, and therefore we do. Our manuals are the next level, followed by board actions, and then the lowest level is parliamentary procedure. The good news is that generally speaking, these things all line up very nicely, and we don't have situations where one is overruling another. But if that were to happen, we would use this hierarchy to decide. Talking about the relationships between the committees and the board. I mentioned earlier this evening that committees are advisory to the board. Their composition, purpose, authority, and charges are laid out in what we call the scope. And at your first committee meeting for the year, your director and your committee chair will go over for you what the scope of your committee is for the year. Now, you as a committee can bring ideas forward within the scope for board consideration, even if the charges, even if it's not included in the charges. It's also possible for you to be an official representative of the MDA if it's designated within policy. So for example, if we were having our annual meeting and we had a reporter there, we might have our president might ask the chair of the committee on annual session to be the spokesperson for that. I could see that happening easily. In addition, I'm sure you're all aware that your staff that supports your committee is there to enable your committee to do a good job, to prepare your reports, to deal with your minutes, to be advisory to you, and provide you information. Excuse me. Your staff also have multiple responsibilities. Some staff actually have multiple committees that they hold responsibility for. So we ask that you be aware of the time demands that you may be making on your staff. Moving on, your committee may have a board liaison. Back in the day, every committee had a board liaison, but subsequent to our governance and kind of a revamp of our committee, there was a feeling that it would be better for most committees to have the committee chair be the liaison between the board and the committee. Some committees that have felt that they would like to have a board liaison have continued to have a board liaison, or if we have a trustee or board member who has a special interest in a committee, you may see that person serve as a board liaison. Your committee chairs will be invited at least once a year to attend and present at a board meeting, and there are a couple purposes for that. Obviously, the board members can read your minutes and they know what you're up to. On the other hand, that doesn't encourage dialogue between the committee and the board. It doesn't allow for relationship building between the committees and the board. And it also doesn't really help with leadership development. As committee chairs and committee members, you may be future board members. You may be current delegates or future delegates. The more exposure that everyone has to each other, the more we'll feel like we're pulling together. So that's one of the reasons why the committee chairs are invited to present at least once a year at every year at a board meeting. We also encourage committees to attend when they have reports or recommendations that are going before the board. If it's not the committee chair, if it's inconvenient, the vice chair can go, or a committee member may be requested to be delegated for that responsibility. So let's imagine you have a report that has gone to the board. You've done a lot of work associated with it, and you have a recommendations going forward. Maybe your committee chair has gone to present the report to the board. At that point, the board, it belongs to the board, and they may completely agree and approve your recommendation. They could revise it a little bit. They may seek advice from a second committee or refer it to another committee for further work. They could also postpone a decision, or they could even defeat your recommendation. Those are all things within the purview of the board. But as I pointed out before, the board isn't there to do committee work, but they do have, in some cases, a broader perspective than you do as a committee member. So, talk a little bit about money, finances. You know, your director will work based on past history and actual expenses and revenues that we've been seeing. Will work to start putting together a budget for the activities that are overseen by your committee in the spring, and the budget is finalized in September. And you know, we do a calendar year, membership year budget. So the 2018 budget started January 1st of this year, go through December 31st of 2018. Committee input into the budget is completely encouraged, and as you know from what I said earlier, that the board is responsible for all financial management. The proposed budget as it comes forward might be approved as put forward or revised. Now, one thing I definitely want you all to know is that if you have a brainstorm, if you have an idea and it does not align with the budget. In other words, gosh, we just passed the budget and here's this new thing that we didn't know was going to be a possibility. The committee may still bring a recommendation for action that has a financial impact to the board, or if timing is critical for some reason, through the EC for contingency funding. So we don't, it's not like we shouldn't be looking ahead, but you should not feel that if there's something that the committee is strongly recommending that it can only be brought forward through the existing budget. So that's something that should be of interest to you. Now let's talk about you as a volunteer leader, just for a couple minutes. We have quite a number of leadership resources that could be helpful to you. So I wanted you to be aware of them. One is Leadership Central. It's your online source for volunteer resources. It's a way that many of our new committee members got involved. They heard about the MDA, they poked around on our website, they filled out a volunteer interest form, and we were able to get them hooked up to a committee or a work group, some other volunteer opportunity that they're interested in. It's a great place to also gain leadership skills. We have some short videos that we put up that are interesting, and we want to start to do more of that. We also have some online education through the American Dental Association that offers leadership skills building online, so that's great. It's also a great way to look back on policies, understand MDA governance, or submit a volunteer interest form. Although you're already involved, so you probably don't have to do that. You can see on your screen is the address. It's on the smilemichigan.com under Leadership Central. I also wanted you to recognize that we do education every year in conjunction with the House of Delegates. It's Wednesday before the first meeting of the House, and although we promote it to the House of Delegates, it's open to any volunteer who's interested. We also are doing an annual leadership workshop, and the Leadership Forum this year will be held on September 28th at the Crown Plaza in Lansing. So we got some great speakers coming, some great breakout sessions. It's at a very convenient location, so I encourage you all to really check it out. And I hope to see many of you there on September 28th. So great news, only 2 more slides. Let's talk a little bit about committee scopes. In general, committees are consistent in terms of their composition. There are several committees, just a few, that are considered special in one way or another, and so they don't necessarily match up with the terms of office or the requirements for membership. But in general, our committees are pretty consistent. We also have the opportunity for consultants to committees, and consultants are approved on the basis of needed expertise or perspective. So consultants, generally speaking, are not used in order to expand the size of a committee or to allow people to continue to serve after their terms are over, but instead because of specific expertise or perspective that the committee relies upon. The committee scope for the committees are to assist the Board of Trustees in overseeing the work of the association. And as I said, the authority is usually advisory, but some committees have delegated responsibilities. There's no doubt that the peer review committees all work within the peer review manual, that the annual session committee, the CE committee, there are many committees that do have very specific authority that has been delegated to them by the board. Duties are those ongoing responsibilities that kind of staked out for the different committees, and the charges are what the Board of Trustees has asked you to do. So how can you do your work? One way is through subcommittees or work groups. You know, a committee chair may appoint a subcommittee if they think it is needed, and any currently serving committee member or approved consultant may serve on a subcommittee as appointed by the committee chair. So no approval is required for that. If you would like to pull in some additional folks in order to get certain perspectives or expertise, you certainly may bring in additional MDA members or others as needed, simply with the approval of the MDA president. Now, let's imagine that you've asked a subcommittee to do a certain task for you. The committee itself must review and approve any subcommittee recommendation before it goes to the board. And I think you can see why. It's just the due diligence to maintain the responsibility for the work product for your committee. And some subcommittees expire at the end of the leadership year or when the work is complete, and they may be reappointed on an as-needed basis. So we have now come to the conclusion. There we go. So now we come to the conclusion of the PowerPoint presentation. This is the standard committee orientation. So I appreciate the fact that you were all kind enough to join us tonight. You'll be hearing from us to ask if this was helpful, if there's any suggestions you have for improving it, if it was a efficient use of your time to present this information to you in this way. But I just want to say good night to everyone, and thanks again for being with us. Thanks again also for your service to the Michigan Dental Association and to our members.